Hello students. In this video we will start with the chapter disaster management. Now there are various types of disaster, man-made disaster or natural disaster. The dangerous events that occur many times in the environment, those are called as the disaster. It can be famine, cyclone, earthquake, volcanoes, etc. and etc. Various areas of life like economic, social, cultural, political, law, administration, everything is affected because of disaster. Even the life in the area of the disaster is totally disturbed. Depending upon the nature of disaster, it can be determined that which component of the environment will be affecting more, whether it is which type of disaster. So in this chapter, we will be learning about the disaster management techniques which are being undertaken and how to overcome the effects which causes the disaster, the dangerous effects, the loss of life, the loss of property, how we can overcome the effects of the disaster with disaster management. So we can classify the disaster in order so that we can know what the effects of disasters are. For example, the cyclone in Odisha or the earthquakes of Gujarat and Latur, the cyclones which takes place in the coastal areas, they all lead to lot of chaos, huge of life and property in each and every region. So however, irrespective of all these, life has always returned to normal within short time. So disaster making the impact for long duration are those which affects or either they are causing severe damage to the property. For example, the famine, the various problems of crops, strikes of worker, rising level of ocean, deforestation, all these effects cannot be overcome easily. But there are few disasters from which the effects can be overcome and the life can be brought back to the track. So there are different types of disaster based on different aspects. For example, we have geophysical, biological and man-made. Geophysical includes the disasters which are related to nature, for example, related to atmosphere and land. So all the disaster which happens in the atmosphere or on the land, those are included in geophysical type of disaster. So it has two types, that is geological and atmospheric. Geological is related to land. For example, we have earthquake, volcano, tsunamis. All these are the factors which happens on the land. Next, we have atmospheric factors. Atmospheric factors are the factors which are related to the atmosphere. For example, snowstorm, cyclones, there can be flood. So all these happens because of the atmospheric disturbance or the disturbance in the atmosphere. Next, we have the biological type of disaster. So there are again two types of biological type of disaster. It can happen in plants and because of animal. Plants can be related to forest fires. It can be any type of fungal disease which spreads in plants or it is transmitted from plants to the animals or humans. So those are called as the disaster which happens from plants. Next, we have animals. They can be infectious viruses which can be transferred from animals to humans and it can lead to a lot of destruction. For example, recently we are suffering from coronavirus. It is also a animal type of infection which has been transmitted from animals. So it is also a biological type of disaster which is happening. Next, we have man-made. Man-made, it happens because of human interference. For example, it can be leakage of any poisonous gas or an atomic test. There can be any disaster. For example, the disaster that you have studied about Hiroshima, Nagasaki, you have studied about other different places where the atomic disaster has happened. Next can be international, it can be war or bomb blast or terrorism which happens internationally between two countries or between different countries of the world. So these are the different types of disaster. Now the disaster, any type of disaster which happens it definitely affects the economy of the nation. That affects is always relative to the disaster, and economy in different parts are destroyed. There are long lasting effects on economy, and there can be huge expenses for its reconstruction. So an effect of disaster, it can be on the social leadership or the local leadership. Citizens become confused. It affects their participation in rescue and rehabilitation activities. Administrative problems arise during these type of disaster. The local governing bodies are affected by disaster, and related departments cannot answer the problems of the disaster, and all of these concerned departments are affected by disaster, and the entire system can collapse if proper disaster management is not followed. So here are a few effects of disaster. There can be loss of life, injury, it can lead to destruction of properties, damage or destruction of production, destruction of lifestyle, livelihood, disruption of essential services because the entire area is damaged. Essential services are not able to be delivered on proper time. The people suffer there. There can be disruption of governmental systems, economy loss, and there are other social and psychological effects also which happens on the governing body as well as on the people. Let's now talk about the nature and scope of disaster. There are different phases which are there for the nature and scope of disaster. For example, we have the pre-disaster phase, warning phase, emergency phase, we have the rehabilitation phase, recovery phase, and reconstruction phase. So the starting phase, that is before the disaster has happened, those are called as the pre-disaster phase, where the people are to be trained about the disaster. They should know that what they have to do in any disaster if in future the disaster take place. Next, we have the warning phase, that is also called as the phase of emergency. The important character of this phase is that maximum lives can be saved by quick action during this phase. Various actions like search, rescue operations, medical assistance, first aid, restoring, communication, removing of the people from the affected areas. So all these are undertaken in the warning phase. Next, we have the emergency phase. Now, emergency phase is when you have to take emergency actions. It is almost related to the warning phase only, where quick actions are to be taken. Next, we have the rehabilitation phase, where the rehabilitation work is started in this phase after what the disaster has happened. It includes clearing of the debris, or we can say restoration of the water supply, repairing of the roads, or rehabilitation of the victims. Also, it is very important to rehabilitate them in proper areas, to feed them properly, to see that all their basic needs are fulfilled. So all these is done in rehabilitation phase. Recovery phase is also almost similar to rehabilitation phase, only where you have to look after the people, you have to see for their recovery. It can be psychological recovery or economical recovery. So all these things are being taken care in the recovery phase. Next, we have the reconstruction phase. Now this is a little complicated phase. This phase begins when rehabilitation starts. So people reconstruct their building, facilitates the road, water supplies, hygiene facilities, everything is being allotted to them. And this phase, the reconstruction, where the people are being recovered completely, and whatever they have lost, everything is being reconstructed and given to them. So these are all the few nature and scope of disaster, how a disaster management team works in any kind of disaster. Now, the disaster may be minor or major, it can be short term or long term. It should be overcome. The effect of the disaster should be overcome. And there are very close relationship between disaster management and public participation. Disaster management is either prevention of disaster or making arrangement to face it, or at least achieve the ability to face it. So disaster is very fast process. It can happen in a fraction of second. So in case of disaster management, there should be an attempt to minimize the loss. Disasters are never planned, but losses due to it can be prevented due to planned manner. So all of this prevention work is done by the disaster management team. Now, the disaster management can be divided into two parts, that is pre-disaster and post-disaster. First, we'll talk about pre-disaster. So, in pre-disaster, it includes the preparation and the planning to face any type of disaster. It can be identifying the pro-disaster areas, collecting the information about the intensity of the disaster or how much the disaster can affect that particular area. There can be maps which can be made. There can be special training which can be given for disaster management team as well as to the local people also. Increasing awareness about the disaster management among the general public, all these are included in pre-disaster management. Next is post-disaster, that is after a disaster has taken place, then what types has to be undertaken. So providing all types of necessary helps to the victim, that is included in post-disaster. Then participation of the local people, they can be saved at the earliest with the help of local people. Quick establishment of help center can be done. Categorization of the people, that is you can group them into categories, and then accordingly what type of medical help they require, or according to their the economical damage or social damage, psychological damage, they can be grouped and then the help can be provided. And all these things, the rescue, the rehabilitation, recovery, reconstruction, all of this is included in post disaster. Now, there are seven main aspects of disaster management, and there is a cycle which goes on continuing. The first thing is preparation. So, a plan is prepared to minimize the destruction in any disaster. Next is redemption. The plan for minimizing the damage to the society and the country is being prepared. Preparedness is a plan which is chalked out, and so we can get quick responses from the general public and administration where people can give their own response, their own ideas. Next is the impact of disaster. The intensity of the disaster is viewed by the disaster management. Response is to given to the disaster, that is immediate, which is given after the incident, and the disaster after the disaster has striken, what the response can be given to it. Next, we have reassurance. Reassurance is an important link between the emergency measure and the national progress, where in this stage we do the rehabilitation or the welfare work. Restoration is again the measure in which the progress of the rehabilitation is viewed and the people are being restored. All these things included into the cycle of the disaster management, and they have to go according to this cycle only. Now, after a disaster has happened, what type of first aid and emergency action can be taken? So we have studied in earlier classes about different types of first aid to be offered to the people for different types of injuries. So this knowledge is to be used, which can be offered to the people, to the classmate, or to the person who is suffering from disaster. Sometimes we have to face the disaster due to our own unawareness, and some symbols are also given here. So whenever you buy something, you should see that if it is flammable or it is a flammable gas, if it is an explosive, it should be kept away from any type of fire or any type of thing which will lead to fire or any damage. So all these things are to be taken care of. Whenever you buy any deodorants or other product, you will see that there are some instructions which are given behind, some symbols which are given behind, and those symbols should not be ignored. Now, there is a first aid kit which should be present at every school or office so that fast action can be taken if any disaster has happened. Now, this first aid kit will include all the essentials which can help to prevent the damage of the disaster. For example, it should include bandages, it should include different types of gloves, soap, then there should be an antiseptic, there should be small pin, scissor, thermometer, petroleum jelly, torch. All these things are included into the first aid kit, and whenever any type of disaster take place, this first aid kits play a very important role, because the basic treatment that should be given to any type of incident which happens can be given with the help of these first aid kit. Now, you all must have heard about mock drills. It is a practice to check the preparedness of facing the disaster as early as possible. It can be virtual, or people can be kept in a situation and how they react to the disaster. Those are called as the first mock drills. Now, trained personals, they observe the responsibilities and check the execution plan. So, mock drills are arranged on disaster. It can be arranged in school, or it can be arranged in any office, and how the people are reacting to that disaster. It is not actually the disaster is happening, we can call it as a fake disaster, and the response of the people is noted, or how they are reacting, that is noted. The main objective of these mock drills are evaluating the response of the disaster. It is to identification of their own abilities, who can help people, and who will be the first one to face the disaster. Also, it helps in improving the ability for quick responses. It also helps in identifying the errors which can be happen. So all these mock drills are done so that people can be even aware, or a practice can be done, so that you can know that how people are going to respond in that particular type of disaster.